but there is still chaos. There's still this lack of fear of the outcome that makes him incredibly dangerous. Hey, everybody, and welcome to my preview for UFC 274. Man, this is a really, really good one. Once again, we have more than one title on the line. Of course, we have the lightweight title. Charles Oliveira going to be defending against Justin Gaethje. And then in the women's strawweight division, we've got Rose Namajunas defending against Carla Esparza, hoping to retain her strawweight title. So 2 titles on the line in this card and just a slew of other really good fights. You've got Shogun Rua fighting, you've got Cowboy Cerrone fighting, and of course, you've got Tony Ferguson fighting Michael Chandler. So, I mean, this is an absolutely can't miss card. It's going to be in Phoenix. I actually take off on Thursday, so I wanted to get this preview in the can before I take off. And I don't know, this is a really, really interesting one for a lot of different reasons. And I'm going to do my best to be organized with my thoughts this time. I felt like last time I wasn't all that organized, but appreciate you guys and all the love that you give in the comments. And I do read the comments and I do try to respond when I can, or at least give you guys a like. So I appreciate you being engaged with the channel. But this main event is a very, very interesting one because you've got 2 guys who just have completely different fighting styles. It's on one hand, you have Charles Oliveira, who, early in his career, really not that long ago, if we're being honest, was very much a one-trick pony, very, very much a jiu-jitsu player. He had no wrestling and really striking that, quite frankly, would get him into trouble a lot of times, more than it would help him. And so it's been incredible to see over his growth in the UFC. And he's one of these guys that came to the UFC so young that he's literally had to grow up in the bright lights of the UFC, which I think there's other fighters that have had to do that, and it's a difficult task anytime you see someone do it, because growing in these shark infested waters is a really tough thing to do. So on one hand, you have Charles Oliveira, who has blossomed and grown into not just a complete mixed martial artist who can function in every aspect of the game. He is a true danger in every single aspect of the game. The striking, he's clearly got power and he's got technique. The clinch game, I mean, nasty elbows, nasty knees, beautiful trips in the clinch. He's a danger factor there. He's got the wrestling. His body lock takedowns are so good. And then, of course, I mean, the jiu-jitsu goes without saying. He's got the most submission wins in the history of the UFC by a mile. He broke that record forever ago, and that just continues to keep breaking his own record. So not only is he well-rounded, which is a term that we throw around a lot, it's not just that he's well-rounded, it's that he's dangerous in every single faction of the game. And no, I did not crack a beer. This is a spritz water, or whatever you call those things. On the flip side of the coin, you have Justin Gaethje, who also has evolved. If you watched his career in World Series of Fighting prior to when he entered the UFC, he was just pure mayhem, fists flying. I don't want to say he didn't have a game plan, but I think the game plan was just violence, which is a pretty good game plan when you're in MMA and you have the skill set that he does. He's a fascinating one because he's got the NCAA D1 All-American wrestling background, and he just chooses not to use it, at least offensively, but you definitely see it defensively. And I think that's going to be an interesting point to talk about in this one. And then, in terms of Justin Gaethje, before I go to some of the tail of the tape, so to speak, for Justin Gaethje, I think I was trying to really put some deep thoughts into this. Deep thoughts. I think what sets Justin Gaethje apart, because there are other fighters that you would certainly put in the category of guys who just really enjoy fighting, like the Jorges of the world, the Nate Diaz's of the world. Those are the guys who like to fight. Yes, they're competitive. Yes, they're martial artists, but they're like, they love the fight. Justin Gaethje falls into that category, but in my mind, he's almost in like a subcategory of his own. And I was trying to, anytime I have this like I don't know, feeling about something in MMA, I just keep asking myself, why? Okay, well, why do I feel like he's in the subset? I feel like he's in a subset because he approaches fights really differently than a lot of people do. Okay, well, why? Why does he do that? Why does he approach fights so differently? And I'll save you all of the iterations of myself, me asking myself why. But what I boiled it down to, and I'd be interested to hear in the comment section if you guys agree with me. I think Justin Gaethje is in a classification all his own because he fights with no ego. Now, every fighter, every person has some amount of ego, and he is a competitor. So he does have an ego in that sense. He wants to win. When I say he has no ego, what I mean by that is you can see in the way that he takes losses that he doesn't have an attachment to the outcome of the fight. It's like, and it's really hard to hold those ideas simultaneously, right? Like on one hand, I want to win. I am a competitor. And you better believe he's a competitor. I mean, you watch him wrestle, watch his career wrestling. It's incredible. He is a competitor. On the other hand, in MMA, in his UFC career, he's not defined by the outcome of his fights. And you can see that in the way that he reacts when he loses. And in the interviews, when he talks about, excuse me, I just bumped the table, when he talks about and is self-aware enough to make assessments of his own skill sets and his own performances, that is a guy that has no ego attachment to people's perception of him and his own perception of the outcome. So what that does, what does that mean for like how Justin Gaethje fights? To me, that means, because when you talk about him, or when he talks about rather, I'm prepared to die in a fight. I don't think he means it literally, but I do think he means it literally. And he did an interesting interview, I think it was maybe with Megan Oliveira, where he kind of described what he meant by that, which once he described it, I understood what he meant. He said when he was choked out by Khabib, that's death. And what he meant is, he's like, if we were in a fight, a real fight with no refs, no cage and no audience, it was a fight. He's like, Khabib could have killed me. And so having been in that moment, having lived through that moment and what it feels like to go out like that in a fight and know that, okay, I would have died here. For him, the acceptance of that, the ownership of that brings him a lot of peace. He doesn't like shy away from the embarrassment I think most fighters feel when they get tapped out or put out, in a choke, or they just lose in general, whatever it is. He has no attachment to the perceptions of other people. I think the only thing he cares about is knowing that when he leaves the octagon, he left everything in there, and there was no decision made in the fight that was made out of fear for the repercussions of making that decision. And I'm sorry I'm spending so much time on this, but I think it's really important, because when you fight someone who isn't afraid of the outcome, that's a dangerous person to be fighting. When you fight someone who isn't afraid to be submitted by Charles Oliveira. Now, of course, he's going to make decisions to avoid that. He wants to impose his own fear on Charles Oliveira. But at the end of the day, he's not really afraid of Charles Oliveira shooting on him. He's not afraid of being tapped out or subbed or whatever it is. That presents an openness of mind in a fight that allows you to make decisions that 99% of other fighters cannot make in a fight, because there's, to varying degrees, some amount of fear that if I do this, then, if I do X, Y will happen and I could lose. I don't think Justin Gaethje I just don't think he's afraid of losing. And I don't think he's afraid of dying. And I definitely don't think he's afraid of pain. So couch everything I'm about to say in that context, because it's really important to think about when you talk about Justin Gaethje. So enough of that. Let me hop into the the stats here for these guys. So in terms of their UFC record specifically, you got Justin Gaethje 6-3 with 5 knockouts and 1 decision. And then you've got Charles Oliveira, 20-8 with 1 no contest, which is crazy. So Justin Gaethje has 9 UFC fights. Charles Oliveira has 29. Significant difference. Charles Oliveira is going to have a 4-inch reach advantage, which I think will be definitely play to his favor early in this fight when he can get that jab going and get those front kicks going. In terms of striking accuracy, I think this is a really interesting statistic, and it's specifically interesting in the context of their volume. So Charles Oliveira, pretty high striking accuracy at 53.2%. Justin Gaethje, though, 60.1%. But when you think about the fact that his strikes landed per minute rate is 7.5, that is wild. So not only is he one of the highest volume strikers on the entire roster, he's incredibly accurate with what he's doing. Again, that makes him super dangerous. I think the fact that he's got a 7.5, significant strikes landed per minute rate, again, speaks to the fact this man is not, he's just not afraid. He's not afraid to walk into the fire, to get in the kitchen, so to speak, and get cooking. And then if you go down a little bit, the takedown defense for Justin Gaethje, I'd imagine that's going to be pretty clutch in this fight. 73.7%, very, very high. Even Khabib, didn't land all of his takedowns on Justin. And then, of course, for Charles Oliveira, 7 point Justin, and then 0.79 submissions per 15 minutes, which is super, super high. When you look at their striking rates in particular, obviously I just talked about how high volume Justin Gaethje is. The flip side of that is that he also absorbs 7.8 strikes per minute, which in this fight, and Charles Oliveira also, he takes some shots, 3.1 strikes per minute absorption rate for Charles Oliveira, but 7.1 for Justin Gaethje. I mean, I love him, but there's not having fear, and then there's like, okay, at some point you're going to meet your match in terms of power. Has he met him yet? Maybe. I mean, Justin Gaethje has been knocked out before. Again, that goes back to like, I don't know that he doesn't fight to avoid getting knocked out. That's just not how he approaches things. Could that get him in trouble in this fight? It's a distinct possibility given the power that we've seen from Charles Oliveira lately. This is where I think it gets super interesting. When you look at the breakdown of where these guys are targeting their strikes. For Charles Oliveira, the vast majority of his strikes are targeted to the head, as most fighters are. 26%, though, 26% are to the body and 15% to the leg. On the flip side of that, Justin Gaethje, 61% to the head, only 8% to the body, and 30.8% to the leg. The kicks of Justin Gaethje are one of his biggest, one of his best, one of his most dangerous, and certainly one of his most interesting weapons that he has. And we'll talk about those in just a second in a little bit more detail. Oliveira, when you look at where they tend to land their offense in terms of positionally, Oliveira does significantly more work in the clinch position and on the ground as well, because as you now know, Justin Gaethje not really looking for takedowns. Again, very high takedown defense percentage for Justin Gaethje. Justin has landed 0 takedowns because he just really doesn't care to wrestle. And Charles Oliveira has landed 34 in his very long UFC tenure, and certainly more and more as of late. So I want to talk a little bit about Oliveira's technique specifically first. So as I said, in the beginning of his career, he really was a one-trick pony. And then right around the Nick Lentz fight, you could see him, and I'd be interested, I would love to have a long conversation about how and why there seemed to be this turning point. But right around the Nick Lentz fight, you could just see him start to believe in his hands and start to believe that he had more than one way to finish a fight. And ever since that fight, you just see more and more and more comfort and confidence coming from him in those striking exchanges. And that evolution leads us to his last fight, which was against Dustin Poirier. And I think a lot of people, even though Oliveira was the champ, when he won the vacant belt against Michael Chandler, there was definitely a thought from the majority of fans, and I would say the majority of analysts as well, that Dustin Poirier was the uncrowned champ, and probably unfair of us in retrospect, because how incredible for Charles Oliveira to have the belt and yet still be kind of counted out. I mean, I wouldn't say completely counted out. I think everybody at that point knew what he was capable of, but it's like, but it's Dustin Poirier. Well, he went out there and he handled Dustin Poirier in about every way that you can. Now, Poirier had him in some big trouble early in the fight, some really tough spots. Oliveira took some big shots, was wobbled by Poirier. So that's a point of fact that can potentially apply itself in this fight as well. Charles Oliveira gets hit and he can get wobbled. It's not like he's made of stone. And, Justin Gaethje, is it possible that he hits harder than Dustin Poirier? Maybe. I think in the right spots, I think he can. But then the tides in that fight completely turned. And the tide in that fight, when you go back and watch it, the moments where Oliveira was starting to shift momentum in his favor, even in that first round where he was getting in trouble, was in the clinch. He did such a great job when they would close distance of really making Dustin not want to engage in the clinch. The knees, the elbows, where Dustin was having the biggest success was at range. And then what happened is as the fight went on, Oliveira was able to implement his wrestling, another part of his game that's just grown leaps and bounds. The takedowns of Charles Oliveira are so well suited for MMA. He does such a phenomenal job of, not just shooting the traditional folk style double leg, or even the style of takedown that Khabib has, where you're shooting from the open mat and putting guys up against the fence, but you're shooting from really far away. Oliveira does such a good job of ducking under the strikes of his opponent, and then doing, like, whether it's a super duck or whatever, finding his way underneath the elbow and then body locking and tripping so that you end up in some sort of dominant position that's really well suited for an offensive jiu-jitsu game, or just for landing ground and pound. Because in the Poirier fight, if you remember, Oliveira controlled Dustin Poirier on top. Dustin wanted nothing to do with, obviously, the submission game, but he couldn't even, it really completely froze Dustin in terms of not wanting to stick a limb out there, not wanting to build a base. That Dustin knows how to get up, but I think he knew all of the things that you need to do to get off of your back entail creating an opening. And he knew that Oliveira is just so good. You couldn't do that. So it was like he was waiting for the round to end and hoping, okay, we'll get our striking going again here. But Charles Oliveira did such a beautiful job of taking the back. It's one of his best series of moves, is when he's able to duck under, take the back, and then start to, he doesn't even need hooks half the time. And his chokes are absolutely incredible. So when you talk about his striking, the striking of Oliveira, he's got a beautiful Muay Thai style where he's able to sit back and use his front leg as almost like another jab, another range fighter. He's got a beautiful jab as well. But because he's not worried about the position of his hips necessarily, he's not, being put on his back is really not the worst thing in the world for Charles Oliveira. Because that's not a huge concern for him, he can strike in a way that a lot of guys can't. Guys who need to be thinking about digging underhooks, thinking about the threat of the takedown. Charles Oliveira maybe doesn't want to get put on his back, not on his terms, but not the worst thing in the world. So he's able to stay a little bit more upright and use that front leg a lot, keep his weight back, and use those kicks right up the middle to dig into the midsection of his opponent. And I think that could be a really big factor in this fight, because Justin Gaethje is going to be coming with those kicks as well. Obviously, the wrestling, the body lock takedowns, like I mentioned, I think at the end of the day, for Charles Oliveira, he's got a couple of X factors in this fight. One is going to be the gas. And I think, he went 3 rounds with Tony Ferguson and looked great doing it. But that fight with Tony Ferguson played out entirely on his terms. And it kind of leads to a broader discussion that we've had about Charles Oliveira for a very, very long time. And that was that early on in his career, everybody was like, okay, well, he folds, so under a certain amount of pressure, Charles Oliveira folds. That part of the discussion is no longer relevant. It just isn't. We've seen Oliveira come back in the Chandler fight. We've seen him come back from that fight, there's an argument that fight should have been stopped. And he came back and obviously did what he did in the second round and knocked Michael Chandler out. So he's not one who folds under the pressure of tough shots. Charles Oliveira can take a shot. He has proven that he can take a shot. I call that mental chin. He's got the mental chin. He's also got a pretty damn good physical chin as well. He can take shots. The only question mark left, and I think that this is what Justin Gaethje keeps alluding to in his interviews, because while Justin has backed off a lot on the talk of like, oh, he's a quitter, I'm going to make him quit. After Justin watched Charles Oliveira beat Michael Chandler the way he did, after he watched him take big shots from Dustin Poirier and come back the way that he did, Justin backed off of that talk a lot. However, in his most recent interview, he still said, he's like, listen, it's not what I thought it was, but once you've walked through that door ever, that door is there, meaning the door out, the way out. And the only question mark that I think we can have about Charles Oliveira still, and it's a small one, is not can he take a shot? Not will he quit if he gets hit hard? That's not going to happen. We know that that's not going to happen. The only thing that we haven't seen from him, because he's been so good that we haven't had to see it, is can Charles Oliveira be a Tony Ferguson? Can Charles Oliveira be a Michael Chandler in the third round? Does he have what it takes? I don't know. I'm doing a bad job of articulating this, but there's quitting because you get hit with a big shot. And then there's not quitting, but like getting overwhelmed, folding when you are so gassed that your body is betraying you. You've got blood in your eyes, and maybe one eye's mostly swollen shut. One of your hands is probably broken. Your face is a bloody mess. Like I said, those Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje moments, those Michael Chandler versus Justin Gaethje moments, that's the only question mark. And I'm not saying that Charles Oliveira doesn't have it. It's just that we don't know yet. And I think that this could be a fight where we find out if Charles Oliveira has that level of dog in him, the blood in your eyes, I can't move my arms, I probably have a broken hand, that level of dog. Because if you ask any fighter, it's not pain that makes you quit. It's cardio, it's gas, it's drowning in your own blood. Your nose is broken and you can't breathe. So anyway, I'm getting a little gory. I'm interested to see if that's a question that gets asked, or excuse me, the question that gets, well, yeah, I'm interested to see if that question even comes up, or maybe it's a quick fight. I don't know. So moving on to Justin Gaethje, we know what his game's about. He's orchestrated chaos, right? And it's become beautifully orchestrated in recent fights. More and more so, I think the Tony Ferguson fight was a complete turning point for him. I think in that fight, he really showed us how fundamentally sound his chaos really is, because Tony Ferguson was the one, because of his, nothing he does is traditional. It's so funky that when you go back and you watch him, there really are things in Tony's game that are exploitable because they're so unconventional, whether it's his footwork or the angles that he's taking. I don't remember what fight it was, but I rewatched it the other night, and where his corner's asking him to throw the sand, he like picks the pretend sand up and throws it. Like, Tony Ferguson he's just a wild man. That's why we love to watch him. But those things open him up, and Justin Gaethje did such a phenomenal job of exploiting every single hole that Tony Ferguson presented him. And since then, even in the Khabib fight, there were glimpses of a better and better technician growing in Justin Gaethje. But the cornerstone of Justin Gaethje's game is two things. It's the volume in his hands, but it's his kicks. I think it's his kicks above all. I mean, he has a beautiful, powerful right hand. He has a nasty, sneaky left hook. He's so good at setting those hands up. But to me, his kicks are the first thing that every single opponent has to worry about. When you go back and watch his fights, first move against Dustin Poirier, leg kick. First move against James Vick, leg kick. Edson Barboza, the fight, we're like, oh, is he really going to be that good at leg kicking? Because now he's fighting Edson Barboza. Those two just went wham, wham. It was like a Muay Thai fight. Oh, you kick me, I'm going to kick you harder. It was incredible to see. Justin Gaethje won that fight, by the way. Justin Gaethje outkicked the best kicker in the division. The Cerrone fight, absolutely Justin Gaethje was chewing up his legs. And then the Tony Ferguson fight destroyed his legs. The Khabib fight, although Justin lost decisively, those leg kicks were starting to be a factor in that fight against Khabib. He was landing them. And then in the Michael Chandler fight, I mean, there's no denying that Justin Gaethje went in there with the game plan that Michael Chandler has struggled with dealing with leg kicks in the past. I'm going to put my best weapon to use. And man, did he ever. And that leg kick for Justin is so special for a couple of different reasons. And the main one, I think, is the way and when he throws it. And when I say when, it's about like a distance thing. Justin Gaethje throws a powerful, powerful leg kick, and he can either turn it into a calf kick or a quad kick. There's really only about, 7 or 8 inches difference between those two, right above the knee, right below the knee. It's the same kick. Justin Gaethje throws it in such a way that you're not going to, it's really hard to train for, is what I'm trying to say. He'll throw it in the clinch. No one throws chopping leg kicks like that in the clinch because it takes a lot of hip dexterity. And frankly, it takes a lot of gas. For someone to support the level of kicking game that Justin Gaethje has, you have to be in phenomenal condition because, I mean, just the simple physics of moving something that the weight of your leg is a lot harder. It's much more of a tax on your system than it is to sit and punch. A lot of people can box for very long periods of time. So you start introducing kicks and sprawls and knees. It's a whole different ball of wax. Justin Gaethje has the gas to support that. And it makes him really, really difficult to deal with. So you add on top of that, the fact that he has phenomenal footwork that Trevor Whitman clearly has been working with him on. He's picking better angles. He's setting up combinations now. There's a coordination and orchestration, but there is still chaos. There's still this lack of fear of the outcome that makes him incredibly dangerous. And that right hand man, whether he's, reaching, I can't remember, I think it was James Vick, whether it's just this long, what ends up kind of being a hook at the end, or it's that beautiful uppercut that he throws. And what I love about how Justin Gaethje throws his uppercut is he digs so far. And by the time he throws it, I mean, his whole torso is twisted and he's bladed so he can split right up the guard of, whoever his opponent is. I think it was Chandler that he cracked Chandler so hard with this beautiful uppercut. It's incredible to watch. He's a really, really special character, but the kicks are going to be a factor in this fight. I'm interested to see how Charles Oliveira deals with the kicks because in that Muay Thai stance and with the Muay Thai background that he has, Muay Thai strikers are the best at checking kicks because kicking is such a huge part of that martial art in particular. And the way that they stand, it's much easier to check kicks because in some ways, sometimes you can just kind of lift and let the kick carry your leg through, although it can be off balancing. And a lot of times that'll set up the hands. And that's often what Justin Gaethje does is he doesn't always throw 100% behind every single kick. Sometimes it's only 80, but 80% from Justin Gaethje is still quite a bit. He'll chop across, and sometimes he'll take his entire torso and his entire body with him. And sometimes he'll kick where his torso and his body stays centered. But he still has that whip in his leg. So he can either do it where he's taking his head completely off, or he can do it where he's staying square to set up other combinations. It's really, really amazing. He landed 26 leg kicks against Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler's calf looked like a Christmas ham after that fight. So if Charles Oliveira can deal with those kicks, that's going to be a major victory for him. And it's going to be something that we're going to find out very early, because 9 times out of 10, the very first thing that Justin Gaethje throws, and when he lands the first one, it's almost like you can see in his opponent's eyes, like, oh, this is what the tape study showed. Like, this is what people were talking about. But man, seeing it, feeling it, have to be 2 different things. I'm thankful I don't know what it feels like. Going to be an incredible fight. Such a cool clash of styles. Quickly, before I wrap up this one, I have to talk about the co-main event. And I know a lot of people are super excited about Chandler Ferguson. I am too, but I want to spend the rest of this video talking about the co-main event because I do actually think it's more interesting than people are giving it credit for. This is obviously a rematch. These ladies fought, gosh, I think back in 2014, and it was when Carla won the strawweight belt. So there's kind of some, I don't know, beautiful poetry in the fact that Carla beat Rose for the belt, and now this many years later, she's having to face Rose to potentially regain the title this many years later. And when you look, it's crazy, when you look back at who they both were at the time that they fought, man, they're just so different. They're babies, right? Especially Rose. She's got the long hair, and I think she was like 21 at the time. She's just a baby. And at that time, Rose Namajunas was primarily a jiu-jitsu fighter. I remember watching her fight in Invicta early. And you could tell that she was going to be something special. But I don't think even then any of us had any idea that like this kind of gangly, tall, flexible looking girl would grow up to have so much power in her hands. That to me, I don't know, it speaks to Trevor Whitman, and it speaks to the work that she's put in terms of really harnessing what is clearly just an innate ability to learn the technique, to own the technique, and to make it a part of who she is so that she can make the most of whatever natural power she has. On the flip side, Carla's a very different person as well. Now, maybe not as different as Rose, because Carla's game is still 100% based around her wrestling attacks. But it used to be that Carla's striking was purely a means to an end. I mean, almost blatantly so. I mean, then that happens a lot of times, right? When you have such a dominant wrestling game. And let's be honest, in women's MMA, there are so few women who truly grew up on the wrestling mats. Like maybe they had a few years of high school wrestling. Not a lot of women had the option, frankly, to go on and wrestle collegiately. It's happening more and more. So I think we're going to see that part of women's MMA really grow. But Carla Esparza was one of the first, frankly. You know, Misha is another one who I think had a collegiate MMA or collegiate wrestling career. Tatiana Suarez, man, if she can get healthy and get back, another phenomenal wrestler. But my point is, it's not all that often in women's MMA that you have a truly well developed wrestling background. And that is exactly what Carla Esparza has. So the fact is, Rose has not faced a wrestler the caliber of Carla Esparza. She just hasn't. And, you know, another thing I think that people are not maybe putting enough stock in is because Carla beat Rose the first time. And yes, Rose is a very different fighter now. There is no denying that. Having that footage, and I like to think of it as like the GoPro footage, the footage that we all have out of our own eyes that's curated into our brain. Carla Esparza has a folder in her head where she knows exactly what it looks like, what it feels like, what it even smells like to beat Rose Namajunas. And when you go back and face someone a second time, that footage is it's invaluable because she's been there before. She knows what it feels like. And once you've done it once, it makes it that much easier to do it a second time. Now, that being said, Rose Namajunas is the queen, and I mean the queen of rematches. When you look at who she has had to rematch, she has had to fight Joanna twice. She's had to fight Jessica Andrade twice. She's had to fight Zhang Weili twice. And not all of these did she lose the first time. So, obviously Joanna beat twice. Zhang Weili beat twice. Tisha Torres, she lost to earlier in her career, avenged that loss. I mean, I wouldn't want to be rematching Rose Namajunas because clearly she's really good at game planning and getting better the second time around. Rose's striking, her angles, her footwork, and her wrestling are really, really impressive. And when you go back and watch, in particular, her last fight with Zhang Weili, the second fight with Zhang Weili, I think we can learn a lot about what her performance against Carla might be like. So Zhang Weili was able to get her down on a number of occasions, but what's so impressive about Rose Namajunas is that she didn't get controlled. And when you think about Zhang Weili, she doesn't have the collegiate wrestling background that Carla Esparza does, but that is a physical specimen of a woman. And I think someone that, if she's wrestling about anybody else, would have gotten stuck there. But Rose's background in jiu-jitsu, she's so good at, as things are starting to hit the mat, she's already looking for a butterfly. She's already looking for ways to threaten submissions so that she can get the fight back to the feet. It's really, really impressive to see. And let's not forget that if she does get put on her back, Rose Namajunas, nasty submission game. We always think of her as a striker now, and we should. She's got incredible power, angles, footwork, all that. But she does have the submission game to back it up. And she's got triangles, arm bars, really good stuff off of her back. So Carla's going to have to be very, very aware of that. Carla Esparza, on the other hand, I always love the beginning of the fights when she walks through the cage and she just stands there and doesn't move. She doesn't hop around. She doesn't warm up. She looks like she's about to do her taxes. And it gives me anxiety because I don't know, move, get warmed up, Carla, do something. But obviously it works for her because she's on an incredible a 5-fight win streak, an absolutely incredible streak. She beat the undefeated Virna Jandiroba at the time, who's an amazing submission artist, Michelle Watterson. She beat Marina Rodriguez, and she beat Yao Xiaonan, who was on a 13-fight unbeaten streak at the time, and she finished her. And she took her down with ease, and I'm talking ease. Now, the only thing about that fight that concerns me when you go back and watch it, and I think it's the beginning of the second round, Carla reverts a little bit back to the old Carla where she's thinking about wrestling above all else. And you can see her focusing in on the hips and the feet of Yao Xiaonan because she knows, she knows if she can get it to the ground, it's going to be over. But in that split second of thinking, how am I going to enter the pocket? She eats a head kick and a 1-2. Now, lucky for her, it didn't even phase her. But as we've seen, you do not want to eat a head kick or a 1-2 from Rose Namajunas. So I think Carla is going to have to be incredibly engaged in this fight. She's going to have to believe in her hands enough that she doesn't have those moments where she just becomes so myopic about finding the hips of her opponent. I do think if she can get Rose to the ground, that she's got the experience, the hours, the tenacity in her grappling where she might be able to control Rose on the ground more than people are potentially giving her credit for. If there's one thing about Carla that must be said, is that she's she is absolutely, she's earned her way back here. Imagine being a title holder and it taking 7 years, I think it is, to get back to a position to be in title contention again. And if she were to win, it would be the longest time in between someone holding the same title twice. And I think by like a lot. So incredible journey and incredible tenacity for Carla Esparza to get back in this position. It's who she is as a person. It's how she fights. You know, the wrestling is not just, it's not just a weapon. It's a constant weapon. It's not just there. It's always there, because if she misses the first shot, if she misses, you know, if she can't get you down on the single leg, she's going to try to run the pipe, and then she's going to, you know, switch off to a double. And if she can't do that, she's going to duck under or take the back. Her chain wrestling is something that you don't find, quite frankly, in the strawweight division. And so I'm going to be very interested to see how Rose Namajunas deals with it, because although she did well against the wrestling of Zhang Weili, Zhang Weili is new to wrestling and she's a very physical woman, but you can't make up for a lifetime spent on the wrestling mats in the way that Carla Esparza has been able to do. So it's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be a great card overall. And that Ferguson Chandler fight, I mean, I'm interested to see which version of Tony Ferguson shows up. I don't know if anybody has seen Tony Ferguson in the last year, where he's been on social media. I don't really understand any of his tweets, but I love Tony as a fighter. He's a fascinating guy. And I think Michael Chandler needs to go out there and he's got to go out there and prove that he's that guy, because coming into the UFC, he was billed as that guy. He believes he's that guy. This is the fight where he's got to prove it and where he's got to show it. But Tony Ferguson has almost the same thing on the line. So we'll see who comes out. Guys, don't miss UFC 274 coming at you this weekend from Phoenix, Arizona. I will be there. Don't miss the weigh-in show. And yeah, we'll see you there, guys.